Alright, in this section of the Bootcamp series, we're going to start covering vehicle counters. I've got an example of vehicle thrown on screen for you now with all the different parts listed out there for you. And we're not going to take and cover every one of those right now in this section of the video. We're going to cover a lot of them over the next so many videos. So we'll address each little individual part as we get to it. Just a few things very briefly. Make sure you keep in mind that red arrow there in the top left signifies the direction that the vehicle is pointing. We've got our armor values there to the bottom left, carrying capacity there at the bottom, name to the bottom right. Above that is going to be our movement factor with multiple different types of movement, whether it's tracked, off-road, or road type of movement. And then your morale, as usual, is up there in the top right. Now, when it comes to some vehicles, you're not going to have a shaken side on the back. It's going to have your ordnance table. So there are included shaking counters that you can take and throw on your vehicle if it does become shaken. Do keep in mind that shaken vehicles must button if they become shaken, and their movement factor is going to be halved, and this is going to be rounded down. It's one of the only times you're going to round down in this game. They also can't spot or spot adjacent units, just like normal with shaken units. Vehicles can self-rally though, and they do get the -2 modifier for their rally attempt if they're in a positive terrain modifier space. To the left of the morale is our HE equivalent, which we have covered in the ordnance videos. And to the left of that, we see red numbers, which indicate machine gun firepower. Now, I've got an example laid out here for us of a different set of vehicles in our Sherman here with this machine gun firepower. I want to touch on the machine gun specifically because there's a lot going on with those different values and what the different symbols mean. Now, you'll notice that it has the numbers listed down. It's either going to be a 2 or 4, and that's the machine gun firepower itself. And depending on what the firepower is going to determine the range. If it's got a firepower of 2, you're going to have a range of 10. And if it's got a firepower 4, then you're going to have a range of 14. Now, you'll notice that some of them have an asterisk behind them. Our Sherman here has 2 4 firepower machine guns, one with an asterisk and one without. An asterisk means that it has 360-degree field of fire, but it must be open to take and fire. A non-asterisk machine gun must fire with either the turret or the hull if it doesn't have a turret, but it can fire if the vehicle's buttoned. But these machine guns must fire separately. If you fire them both at the same target, you're not allowed to take and add them together and have a firepower of 8. It's 2 separate attacks of a 4 firepower machine gun. Now, you can take and fire all those things together in one impulse. So we could fire our ordnance weapon on this tank and both machine guns at this hex at separate targets if we wanted to, but it would be 3 separate attacks, one for firepower, another one, and then your ordnance weapon firing at whatever targets you so choose. You will have some machine guns that have a R associated with the firepower, and that simply states that it is able to be fired in a rear arc. So you would just look at the complete opposite of your front arc, and it could fire there behind it. So you could fire at targets in 2 separate directions. Now, there is a optional rule involved with non-asterisk machine guns that have a firepower 4. I'm not going to get into it very specifically because it is optional, but you are able to take and split that 4 firepower into 2 firepower if the hull and turret are facing in separate directions. So keep that in mind while we touch very briefly here on open and closed. I mentioned earlier that a vehicle has to close and button up if it has become shaken due to whatever effect. So if a vehicle is open, which if you're just looking at the counter itself without the turret being changed and facing, it's considered to be an open vehicle. They can spot as normal. They can spot adjacent enemy units automatically. They get a -1 modifier for their ordnance hit table, but they are vulnerable to small arms fire, but they can fire all of their machine guns. If a vehicle's buttoned, which you would signify by placing a button counter on it, matching the turret, then it is invulnerable to small arms fire, but they're not going to auto spot adjacent enemy units. And they can make spotting attempts, but it's going to have a +1 modifier associated with it, making it a little bit harder. And they're not going to be able to fire their machine guns that have an asterisk. So as an example, if our Sherman here turned its turret facing this way and it was buttoned, this would mean that its non-asterisk machine gun could not also fire, so they would no longer have 360-degree fields of fire, so they could fire one machine gun and their ordnance weapon at this German squad up here, but they could fire nothing at these enemy units over here on this side.